Well, welcome to the International Marcé Society for Perinatal Mental Health annual general meeting. And we had 75 people sign up for this event, and we're up to 43. I apologize for talking like you weren't here because I didn't quite realize how this worked. But we are happy to be here, and we have a wonderful lineup of people to tell you about things that are going on at International Marcé. I'm Jennifer Payne. I am your president. Kelsey, why don't we go to the next slide? This is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to talk to you for just a minute here in just a second, and then we're going to have very brief updates, 5 minutes or less, from each of the special interest groups that we have. We have, I believe it's 6 interest groups. And then Dr. Lavinia Luma will be talking about the proposed changes in our Constitution that as a society we need to vote on. She'll explain those. And then we're going to have some really wonderful guest speakers and a brief question and answer period. All questions and answers should go into the chat function, if I'm not mistaken. And if you are not muted, please make sure you're muted unless you're speaking. Next slide, please. So this is me. I'm Dr. Jennifer Payne. I'm happy to be your president. And I feel really happy about leading such a wonderful international organization. My goal as president, and you'll hear me talk about this at our upcoming conference in Barcelona next fall, is to really take us from being a fairly small international organization with the focus being on international. I am hoping that we will have more participation in our conference this year than we ever have. From multiple countries. I'm asking each of the regional groups to prepare a symposium for the conference, and we are going to plan a truly international conference with speakers from all over the world. I very much am open to suggestions and comments and criticism. So please, if there are any things that you think I should know, please do not hesitate to email me. With that, I'll get on with our next slide and introducing our special interest groups. This was a project that was started by our president, Lisa Segre, a number of years ago. And the idea behind the special interest groups is to have a group that's focused on a particular portion of perinatal or reproductive psychiatry. And each of the interest groups not only vary by topic, but in the projects that they are carrying out. So I thought that today it would be lovely to hear from each of the special interest groups and get an update on what they're each doing. Right now, we have special interest groups on fathers, pregnancy loss and newborn death, prevention of perinatal mental health disorders, reproductive mental health forensics, sexual and gender minorities, and perinatal refugee and immigrant women. And I'm very excited to introduce to you the first of our special interest group speakers, which, if I remember correctly, is Dr. Sheehan Fisher. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So I'm Sheehan Fisher. I am a clinical psychologist and professor at Northwestern University. I am the chair of the special interest groups in general and represent for them at the board, but also I'm the chair of the Father Special Interest Group. As was mentioned, Lisa Segre was the one who helped to create this idea and helped to support the efforts in this direction and continuing underneath of Dr. Payne's leadership. So we've done quite different things in the past. We've done different events. In 2020, we did our Fathers Special Interest Group Roundtable. And then after that, we actually published in the Archives of Women's Mental Health article about expanding the international conversation about fathers' mental health. The goal was to really think about this, as also was mentioned by Dr. Payne, like internationally, really focusing on how do we get a voice from people all over. And since then, we've done webinars about engaging fathers in clinical practice. And then I was also the guest or special editor for the Archives of Women Mental Health, focusing on fathers in relation to mom mental health and supporting them. We do have an upcoming event that I hope many of you all attend, and also to tell others about. We are trying to once again focus on the international part. We are having speakers from 6 countries, or actually 7 countries, Japan, Nigeria, Oman, Brazil, Kenya, US, and Australia, focusing on diversity within fathers. Think about the different experiences of fathers in those regions, including Indigenous people in Australia, African Americans in the US, and then those from Japan, Nigeria, Oman, Brazil, and Kenya. So we are really trying to push this effort, really thinking about getting the representation, understanding the experiences of fathers worldwide, and trying to make that more the forefront, and hope to continue that effort. We are going to do some of that actually at Mona. Some of the individuals on our committee are submitted with me on a symposium focusing on diversity in fathers for Latin American fathers, African American fathers, and fathers of Asian descent. And then we are also doing some workshops in these areas too. So we really are trying to push this idea of understanding globally the father's experience. The main purpose of the Father Special Interest Group is, though, to provide education to the members broadly. As I always say, you do not need to specialize in fathers. We are here to do that. We want to just give you the information to see how fathers fit into your role and your specialty. So even if you're working only with moms, you can understand the father mental health, how that impacts her, or also impacts the family, whether you're a pediatrician or OB-GYN. There's always a way in which the partner plays into that role. And I actually was invited to be a keynote for this upcoming conference from Mona that will be talking about non-birthing parents in general, even expanding how we understand away from the cisgender view of fatherhood, but thinking broadly about it. So our goal is to try to provide as much information as possible to support our members and to provide education and resources to you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Fisher. You do amazing work, and we're really happy to hear from you. Next slide. The next special interest group who will be talking is about the Pregnancy Loss and Newborn Death Special Interest Group, and the chair is Dr. Deb Rich.
Hello, everyone. I'm really thrilled to have been invited by Lisa to start the Pregnancy Loss and Newborn Death Special Interest Group towards the end of her presidency. We are an international group representing really global people. We have people in Japan and Hong Kong, in Australia and New Zealand, all across the United States, in Africa, all across Europe, Canada, and Mexico. And our goal also is to support providers, but to provide you with information both about professional resources, articles, research, basically evidence-based practice that crosses both the medical care and the psychosocial care of families who are experiencing pregnancy loss and newborn death. Some of the research looks at efforts in the area of stillbirth prevention, efforts in the area of universalizing demographic information and definitions related to pregnancy loss. We are internationally, one of the obstacles in identifying incidents is that pregnancy loss is defined differently from country to country, and in the United States from state to state, looking at gestational age during pregnancy, and also whether losses that occur before birth are not necessarily included in perinatal mortality statistics. We know that the experience of pregnancy and newborn death is interwoven in the experience of perinatal mental health, with pre-existing conditions, new onset conditions, and just the impact of the trauma itself. So we, as the chair, I've been very interested in finding ways to engage participants in real-time conversation, which as an international society, of course, is difficult to do with time zones. So we have been, when we meet, I meet with the group in 3 different times so that I'm addressing time zones, hopefully globally. We have provided salons, which are topic oriented with a person who's the lead discussant, basically raising an issue for others to provide input and problem solving. We have not yet provided webinars, but are hoping to do more of that in the coming year. We have an extensive list of support and educational resources that are on our webpage. It had been kind of clunky to find, so please let me know if you are looking and unable to locate it. We have recordings of all the salons thus far that are on our page. We have the beginnings of an annotated citation list. We also have had some tech issues in getting it posted in ways that are easily accessible. Our goal is to have these lists of resources, professional and patient-oriented, for you to be able to use and distribute, both available on the website listed there and also as PDFs so that you can take them and distribute them. We are working towards having more real-time email threads in topics. The technology so far for International Marcé has not provided that type of group list that you'll see in some other organizations. And my hope is that we'll be able to find some budget workable way to have topic-oriented email threads so that participants can more actively engage with each other, so that we're not reinventing the wheel in each country and are learning from each other's new discoveries. I welcome your questions about the group. I welcome your participation in the group. Any of the educational offerings are open to any Marcé members internationally. You don't have to be a member of the SIG group in order to attend, nor do you have to be a member of the SIG group in order to present. And we are also welcoming of consultation requests related to cases that you may be working with, research that you may be working with, academic development of training opportunities that you may be working with, so that we can broadcast that to our membership. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rich. Next slide. The next SIG group is Reproductive Mental Health Forensics, chaired by Dr. Diana Barnes. Dr. Barnes, take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. I was invited and very grateful to have been invited by Lisa Segre at the end of her presidency to chair the Special Interest Group on Forensics and Maternal Mental Health. We are creating a forum where we can discuss cases of interest. We're looking at a number of different issues. One of them is the law and how laws need to change, and is there a global approach to doing so? We're looking at issues around social media and how that influences public perception of these cases when women are criminally charged. We're looking at language and how language affects perception and even verdicts and sentencing. We're looking at the DSM and how do we work with the DSM and law, and how do we bring that together. We have a wide representation from Canada, South Africa, United States, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, the UK. Right now, we are completing a statement for media, kind of bullet point of what to say when someone is contacted by the media. We're also working with the Archives of Women's Mental Health on a special collection on forensics and maternal mental illness. So we invite you to join us. We meet on the last Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Central Time, if you can figure out what that means in your time zone. But we certainly invite you to join us. It's an exciting group. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. Next slide. Our next special interest group is the Sexual and Gender Minority Special Interest Group, chaired by Dr. Lapping Carr. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Lapping Carr. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor at Northwestern University. And the Sexual and Gender Minority Special Interest Group is relatively new. It's been in existence. I was asked to start this about 2 years ago. And so we've been doing a lot of the kind of groundwork over the last couple of years. And so just about a year ago, we kind of launched a listserv and started advertising it and had a nice response. We have folks from North and South America, Europe, and Australia as members. We have a listserv where we're doing a lot of sharing of articles and resources. We also developed our mission and our vision and posted that on the listserv. And I think that's something that for our group was really important to kind of understand what our goals were. And so a couple of the projects that we've been working on are developing an inclusive and affirming intake process. So sort of like a form, but a lot more flexible than just a straightforward form, kind of a resource for clinicians to be able to kind of effectively respond to in an affirming and culturally sensitive way, people who are in front of them that might not be heterosexual or cisgender, might come from a sexual or gender minority group. And if you don't have kind of the tools of how to respond effectively, it can be really distressing for that person. And so we're also starting a discussion prompted by one of the articles that was shared on our listserv. We had a discussion around what inclusive language could look like in perinatal mental health care and research for people from the sexual and gender minority community. And we're kind of thinking about where to go with that discussion, considering maybe developing some recommendations about what language might be helpful to use in certain circumstances or by different people. And then one of the pieces of our mission is to really provide those resources and this information to clinicians and researchers who are working in the perinatal mental health field. And so we're hoping to develop some trainings, some workshops, some webinars around all of these things to offer to the broader Marcé membership. And so if anybody has any interest, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk with you more about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next slide. Our next SIG group is the Perinatal Refugee and Immigrant Women Special Interest Group. This is a new group to the society and I think very timely. And this is co-chaired by Dr. Rodriguez Munoz and Dr. Garcia Lopez. Helena, we cannot hear you. It probably has to do with your earphones, maybe. It looks like your microphone is not working. Why don't I, in the meantime, go to the next slide? Okay. So next slide and we'll come back. So our next SIG group is the Prevention of Perinatal Mental Health Disorders Special Interest Group. And they have a slide presentation.
Thank you. I'm Emma Motrico, and I'm going to present the prevention of perinatal mental disorder special interest group. The co-chair of the group is Mimi Lee and me, and you can see here the steering committee. We have people from 8 countries. We have a very interdisciplinary group from social work, psychiatry, psychologists, and psychiatry, psychologists, and nursing too, and nursing. The next page. Our mission is to develop a collaboration for the prevention of perinatal mental health disorders and also the promotion of prevention programs globally. We began our SIG in July 2021, and we had a wonderful and welcoming response. In October 2021, we have 6 online meetings with different topics: high-risk groups, online intervention, implementation, family-based preventive intervention, developing countries, and policy advocacy or political advocacy. The next. Now we have more than 150 members from the different regional groups of the Marcé Society. Next. And the current and future activities, we have a listserv for communication among members and opportunities for collaboration, resources such as key articles and evidence-based resources for clinicians and researchers, and salons to discuss about different topics. The first salon was in June 2023, and the topic was prevention of perinatal mental health disorders, main concepts and general basis, and have a very nice response. And the next salon will be, the next slide, will be in October. And the topic is how do we increase screening of perinatal mental health disorder. I think very interesting topic with 2 very nice speakers, Mieke Lambreske Vandenberg, perinatal psychiatrist and associate professor Erasmus Medical Center Rotterdam in Netherlands, and Rena Vina, senior lecturer, head of the Rehabilitation and Health Track School of Social Work in Bar Ilan University, Ramat Gan in Israel. So you are welcome to attend this salon. I think it's very interesting, and we can discuss about the screening, that is very important topic on perinatal mental health. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't believe Helena is connected yet, so we will move on to discussing the changes in the Constitution. This part of the discussion will be led by Dr. Lavinia Lumo, our next president, and she will do a fantastic job. I want to let everybody know that we will be voting online to approve the changes in the Constitution. After this, you will receive a link where you can go and you can vote for or against or abstain for each change that we're going to discuss. So it will not be a group change, it will be for each particular change to the Constitution. Voting on that will remain open, I believe, till October 13th, I want to say, but you will also receive that information when you receive the link. So Dr. Lumo, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen, for the introduction. Are there slides available, Kelsey? All right, I'm just going to jump right into it. The Constitution is available for everyone to view as it stands. I'm just going to focus on the changes that we're going to, the proposed changes that we'd like to make. To start off, the thought was to update the language to make it more inclusive. So the changes are highlighted in red. So the society aims to provide more to promote and facilitate and communicate about research into all aspects of mental health of women, their partners, and or other perinatal individuals. We thought this term would be more inclusive because there are individuals who don't identify as women who could be themselves present in the perinatal period, family members and their infants during the perinatal period. So point number one is more inclusive language. Point number two, the change we'd like to make is to have an official declaration of conflict of interest. Currently, what does happen is at every meeting, each person needs to declare any new conflicts of interest. It's time consuming and a little bit tedious. So we thought to rather focus on coming up with something more streamlined, where all members of the board on an annual basis can review their conflicts. There'll be a conflict of interest policy, and they'll disclose any financial or other conflicts of interest, including serving on competing organizations in a leadership position. And this can be in written form, and the secretary would be in charge of distributing the conflict of interest forms, and it would be up to the board members if there are any changes to the conflict of interest that they have, that they could just update the form so that it's sort of more streamlined and official. So that is point number two of the change. And point number three is the beginning of the tenure. So currently what happens is the new board gets appointed in the September month, but real work basically starts in January of the year. And between September and January, it's the old board, it's a transition period. So we just felt that it would be more streamlined if we could officialize it and have the tenure begin in January the 1st after the election. So the board would still be presented in the September of the conference, and then in the January the year after, they then officially start working, because that's when real work starts. So next point is point number 4, terms of office. So currently what's happening on the board, there's some people who are serving for 1 term, some people are serving for 2 years, some people are serving for 4 years, and there isn't handover and transition period, and some of the terms don't really overlap, and it gets a little bit disjointed, and some people are only allowed to serve for 4 years and 8 years. So this is an effort to create more stability so that the existing board can hand over to new members, board members, and so that things are more streamlined. So the proposal is that the secretary, the treasurer, board members will be elected for periods of 4 years and may be re-elected for a maximum of 1 additional 4-year term. And also we have co-opted members, the information editor, the media director, who would then serve on the board with full voting privileges until the next General Assembly. And this is typically 2 years. But we have proposed that they can serve and be co-opted for an additional 2-year term, because what tends to happen is the first 2 years they start on something, and then they're not able to carry on. So this would enable them to be re-elected and serve an additional 2 years, and it would be in concurrent with the other board members. And to prevent dictatorships from developing, we have said that board members will be serving for 8 years, and this will also help to allow other people the opportunity to be part of the executive board. Finally, in terms of information, we have highlighted in point number 5 that the administrative secretary, in collaboration with the information editor and the media director, will circulate members with a newsletter to the members at least twice a year. All those changes will still be in place, but what we focused on is how information will be disseminated. It would be via email, listserv, or any other social media or online internet-based platform. Originally, they just had Facebook, Twitter, and web postings. And as we know, Twitter is no more. So when this was submitted, Twitter still existed. So we'll probably have to update that. And it's very interesting in that in different parts of the world, the different social media platforms, and with the communications committee, we're expanding and looking at more broad-based internet-based platforms to unite our global society. So those are the 5 proposed changes that we'd like to make to the Constitution. Really try to condense it and summarize it to make it easy for everyone to understand, so each person can vote on the changes from point 1 to point 5. I hope there are questions. If there are any questions, you're welcome to put them in the question and answer box. And I think that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lavinia. That was a great explanation of a lot of work and a lot of discussion amongst the board. You will be receiving copies of the Constitution and copies of the proposed changes so that you can easily review them and not have to remember this presentation. Do we have Helena mic'd up at this point? I'm not getting an answer on that. So I'm going to assume that we do not. And if we could move on to the next slide. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you our 2 guest speakers. Both are going to be speaking on forensic issues. You've already heard from Diana Barnes, but who will be talking on understanding maternal mental illness in the courtroom. And we'll also be hearing from Dr. Subramani, who will be talking on maternal filicide in South Africa, legal issues, and the psychiatric expert. One of the goals of the society, I think, is to have discussions where we compare and contrast particular issues across countries. I think that will add to our understanding and sophistication in dealing with these issues. So Dr. Barnes, I believe you will be going first, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Well, I have been consulting and testifying on criminal cases involving all aspects of women's reproductive mental health since 2002. And in that time, I've had probably more than 70 cases involving a whole wide range of women's reproductive mental health issues. And probably preaching to the choir here, but in the United States, we are way behind much of the rest of the world in terms of our understanding that the first year postpartum is a year of tremendous psychological and emotional fragility. The UK and a number of other countries have an infanticide law, which we do not. And with the exception of Illinois, which now has a law and has had a law since 2018, where you can use a perinatal mood disorder, whether it's postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, as a mitigating factor in sentencing. And you can also use it if a woman is vying for post-conviction relief, because the issue of a perinatal mood disorder was not raised at the original trial. But other than Illinois, in this country, We use an 1843 law from the UK. Even though the UK now has its own infanticide law, we are still working with a very antiquated law called McNaughton. And basically, McNaughton is considered the right or wrong test. And McNaughton says, did the individual at the time of the crime, did they have a mental disease or defect? If they were suffering from a mental disease or defect, as a result of that, were they incapable of knowing or understanding the nature or quality of their actions? Or, and it could be and, or it could be or, if they couldn't understand or know, were they incapable of distinguishing right from wrong when they committed the act? In some states, like California, where I live, there is also the consideration of legal wrongdoing and moral wrongdoing. But McNaughton only applies if you're testing insanity, if you're testing sanity. There are a wide range of cases involving women's reproductive mental health that would not apply. For example, cases involving unperceived pregnancy or neonaticide. In addition, and I've had a number of cases over the years where sometimes the baby, we're used to thinking of the baby as the victim in infanticide cases, but I've had a number of cases where the baby actually is not the victim, but the birth of the baby acts as a catalyst for the onset of a serious mood disorder, and as a result, her behavior has criminal implications. Interestingly enough, arguing insanity is used in less than 1% of all cases in the United States. And when it's used, it's seldom successful, which is unbelievably disheartening for the expert like myself, who's called to testify. And a different judge or a different jury in a different state could yield a completely different result. And it's all very unpredictable. And some states in the United States, like Arizona, use a version of guilty except insane or guilty but mentally ill, which is not a hopeful verdict for a woman who's being sentenced, because she can seek, if she receives a guilty but insane, she'll receive mental health treatment, but then at the end, she has to serve out the rest of her term. So if she receives a sentence of 25 to life, which is customary here in the United States, these cases are generally charged as murder, and she gets 5 years of treatment, she still has to finish out the rest of her sentence. So I was trying to think what would be a case that I could present to you that would show you kind of not only the injustice of all of this, but also the unpredictability of our laws here in the United States and how unreliable they are in terms of helping to affect treatment for a woman, understanding what a woman is really experiencing when she's having a psychotic episode, or if postpartum depression leads to some kind of action that then has criminal implications. So I had a case back in 2018. It was a clear case of what we call altruistic filicide, where this young woman drowned her baby in the bathtub, fully believing that it was in the best interests of this child and to spare her what she believed in her delusional state was a life of pain and misery. At the first trial, and you notice I said the first trial, I testified. And in California, as there are in many other states, there are two phases to trial. There's the guilt phase, and basically it's not, did she do it or not? We generally know who did it, but it's, is she guilty as charged? So if she's been charged with murder, is she really guilty of murder, or is she guilty of, let's say, manslaughter? If she's found guilty, then it will proceed to the sanity phase of trial. Well, in this case, the young woman was found guilty of murder, and I don't recall now why at that point it did not go on to the sanity phase, but she was found guilty of murder. And a couple of years later, I was called to testify again because apparently there had been an appeal and the original verdict was overturned on appeal. So I was called to testify at the second trial. At the second trial, she was found guilty of murder in the first phase, and then the jury deadlocked. They could not make a decision on the second phase, which was the sanity phase. At that point, the attorneys did not want to try it again, and they were ready to agree on a plea, which would involve some kind of incarceration. And I think it was somewhere around 10 to 15 years of incarceration. But for whatever reason that I'm not privy to, the judge did not want to allow a plea agreement and insisted that they try the case again. It went to trial a third time, just on the insanity phase. On the third trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And she was remanded to our state psychiatric facility where she's receiving treatment. And I had the opportunity to have some correspondence with her very recently because I wanted permission from her to talk more openly about her case. And I could tell by our correspondence that her treatment was effective because her ability to be coherent, to write to me in a way that was understandable, was clear evidence that she was getting better. And there's certainly a hopefulness in this, but there's also the heartbreak of what would have happened if on the first trial she was found guilty and that was the end. And I have had a number of cases over the years where women have been given a second chance and they've turned their lives around because they've been effectively treated.
That is absolutely true. I've seen a number of cases of women who were prosecuted and women who ultimately were treated instead of being prosecuted. And it would be nice if we had a more standardized approach across the United States, which is true of many things, and yet is something that's thought of as a strength to our country, that we can have very different rules and regulations in different states. But I always wonder about whether that's true for everything. Dr. Subramani, you are next, I believe.
Hello. Yes. Hi, everybody. So my internet connection's unstable. I'm going to leave my video camera off, if that's all right. Just listening to Diana, and we've been discussing some of these issues on the special interest group. There are many similarities, however, some differences. And I think you'll find that our law seems to be a little bit more in keeping with promoting better mental health. So we have what we call the Criminal Procedures Act, and the section of the law that a woman might be referred to us at a state psychiatric facility in the first instance for observation, and then secondly for treatment, is the Criminal Procedures Act, section 77, 78, and 79, and that's dating from 1977 as amended in 1979. So I mention the date in particular because you note that the Constitution, the new demographic South Africa, really came into being in 1994. So essentially prior to that, the law in South Africa, as in America in terms of the M'Naughton rules, we follow the same procedure. So essentially, a woman is referred to a forensic psychiatric hospital where I work to assess fitness to stand trial and criminal responsibility. And this can happen at any point during the course of criminal proceedings by virtue of either mental illness or intellectual disability. So a family member may report to the court that the relative has a history of mental illness or is intellectually disabled, or if the accused is found to be unable to understand the nature of the charge against them, and or provide an adequate defense, or if they were unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of their actions. So I think it's one thing to know that you're doing something wrong, but another in terms of the application thereof, in terms of how you then acted. So the person then would be referred to us for a what we call a joint assessment. So in this case, a panel of psychiatrists are asked to assess the accused, and she is admitted to a hospital for up to 30 days. Now, during that time, we perform multiple assessments, so repeated psychiatric interviews, independently. So there's a psychiatrist appointed for the state and a psychiatrist appointed for the defense. In certain instances, the court may ask for a psychological assessment as well, in that a psychologist is part of the panel. So it's not routinely indicated. However, what we routinely do is, in instances where there might be some difficulties with the assessment, if we require personality assessments or other psychological assessments, we would then ask a psychologist member of the team. So as a teaching hospital, we have psychologists, intern psychologists, community service psychologists, in addition to the rest of the team, which is made up of psychiatrists, occupational therapists, and of course, nursing observations in the hospital setting is tantamount in terms of assisting with the evaluation. When the 30 days are up, we then write a joint report. If there is a discrepancy between the prosecuting psychiatrist for the prosecution and the psychiatrist for the defense, we would then ask that a third person be appointed on the panel. So the similarities you can see are there in terms of the law in America, with the differences as mentioned by Diana, but the difference is that women are sent to a psychiatric facility for the evaluation. Post that, if the court is satisfied with the report that's written, and we find the woman not guilty, unable to, she's not fit to stand trial, and or she may be fit, but at the time of the offense, and I think this is the difficulty that we often have, and this is universal, that all the assessments are retrospective, and by the time they get to us for evaluation, some time has passed, and women who have been ill might become ill whilst awaiting to be admitted, and women who are not ill, the other way around, who are ill may become better, because in the correctional facilities, there is provision for psychiatric help as well. So I think in the obvious cases, and we're looking at psychotic disorders here, or where psychosis is part and parcel of the mood disorder, or there is a severe delirium. And I recall being part of one such case where a woman with HIV diagnosis and a very low CD4 count, in a fit of delirium, flung her baby against the wall, and the baby died. She was then referred to us. So we do have similar cases like that as well. Now, what happens to a woman? It's noted as the disposal of the woman once she is found not fit or not responsible for the crime. And again, we don't have an insanity defense as such. There's no insanity law or infanticide law. Women would be referred on charges of murder, right? So in the case where the woman is really ill, she is then referred back to that psychiatric facility for treatment in terms of a different part of the law, and that's the Mental Health Care Act, Section 42. And in that instance, what then transpires is the woman gets treated in its entirety by the entire MDT with regards to a biopsychosocial approach to treatment, and reports are written for the courts regularly until they are satisfied, or we suggest or make a recommendation that the woman should then be granted a conditional discharge or an unconditional discharge, in which case, in the instances of psychotic disorders like schizophrenia or mood disorders like bipolar disorder, we would ask that the woman be treated as any other psychiatric patient in the community should. So I must say that, contrary to how it seems with Diana's narrative, and I did a check with my staff as early as this morning, we actually have been called just once to court, in which case our report was refuted. Most of the time, or in every other case that I've been involved in that, and this has been since it would be 2006, so around 17 years, the reports are generally accepted as valid and reliable due to perhaps the rigor with which we conduct the assessments, the clarity of the reports, and our reports tend to be brief compared with many other instances, in which case they long drawn out reports of instances which really explain a woman's behavior rather than excuses it. And I think that that's one of the fundamental issues that psychotic disorders finds its difference from mood disorder, depending on the severity. But of course, it's very much on a spectrum, and we're mindful of the fact that a woman with a mood disorder, with many other psychosocial factors, may, in a moment of overwhelming stress, do something that she might not have done had she not have had all the other circumstances. Usually, we would suggest those as mitigating factors, which would be used in sentencing, or in certain instances, South African law does have the diminished capacity rule. So if we felt that the woman, by virtue of an emotional state, had diminished capacity at the time of the act, we would then say so, and the courts would then decide. So the objectivity is maintained, but once a woman becomes a state patient, then of course she's a patient like any other, and she is treated as such. So in terms of sentencing, I would think our longest running patient is a severely ill schizophrenic patient who, although she's out in the community, she has not been recommended for conditional or unconditional discharge as yet. And the reason for this is the high risk that we found. It was a 34-year-old woman with schizophrenia, notoriously non-adherent to medication, despite many different psychotropic agents used. And she relapsed, and at the height of her psychosis during the pregnancy, a termination was offered in keeping with the choice of termination of pregnancy act, which we have in the country, which is also a rather progressive act compared to the previous act that we had. but she refused, and due to her inability to give consent for it, she had the baby, but within 2 weeks, medication was stopped and she relapsed and smothered the baby with a pillow. So she became a observandi, first of all, observandus with us, and subsequently a state patient. And she proved to be treatment resistant because, as we know, in terms of many schizophrenics who are non-adherent, very early onset with red flags in terms of what would define her as treatment resistant early on, we saw that happening, and we've decided in terms of keeping her safe, in terms of keeping the community safe, because this is a woman who not only, unfortunately, the tragedy of neonaticide, infanticide in this case occurred, she has had displays of aggressive behavior towards other family members. The advantage of, in a weird way, it is an advantage of becoming a state patient rather than going to jail and being treated, and rather than being, I'm going to use the term ordinary patient, is that the courts will require reports. And if there is any notion that she's non-adherent or for whatever reason, we feel that she needs to be readmitted to our facility, we can then suggest that to the courts, and they would ask for that as well.
That is amazing. And I think a very humane way to approach these issues, and really could serve as a model for what we should be striving for across the world, which is a very calm and reasoned approach to these cases. I'm mindful of the time, but I wanted, so I want to thank our guest speakers for speaking today. This has been a very enlightening session where we can compare and contrast the differences across countries. And I hope that we can continue this conversation at our conference in Barcelona next September. So I'll look forward to more discussion in person as well as virtually. So thank you so much to both of you for being willing to speak today. Before we turn it over to questions and answers, Helena, are you audible at this point? Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. So why don't you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about the refugee and immigrant SIG.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for being patient with me. My name is Helena. I'm a mental therapist, also a faculty member and researcher. I am taking care of this interest group of interest alongside with Marcé Rodriguez. She's not here tonight because she is flying for a conference, so she's not available, but she sends regards. Well, we're a very new group of interest. We have just basically started. So what we can, or the information we can provide so far is that we have just started. We have a section at the web page, it's finalized. We have promote special interest group alum members, and also we have been inviting other colleagues and other researchers to learn and see what we do at the Marcé Society, and providing information about our hopes and our goals for this group of interest. We have sent reach out emails, welcome emails, and we are creating a list of participants who are interested in this group of interest. And we are creating, or we have decided to create a sub list if you will, because they're members who wants to receive information or about trainings, about materials, about resources, and some other researchers and colleagues are more interested in being more active members. So we're kind of keeping that in mind so we can narrow down the information that we send out. We have not set a date for the first meeting so far. We're in the process of, but we have an open forum that's available for connecting researchers. What we're doing is that we're wanting to hear about members' interest in terms of the needs and materials, and so we can narrow down and we can refine the quality of the contents and materials that we're hope to provide. And also we're looking at, in terms of research, in terms of learning, we're looking at elements that play a role, or the elements that we think that might play a role in the maternal mental health in the context of immigrants and refugees, very specific elements that play a role. And it is a hope that we can come up with successful and accurate interventions for other colleagues, and especially for researchers, but also for practitioners. We would like this group of interest to be patient-oriented in the quality of the trainings that we would like to provide or come up with. And yeah, that would be the review of what I'm doing so far, what we're doing. If anyone is interested in one more information, I'm available here. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for your persistence with the equipment failure. So we are wrapping up at this point. We are down to a question and answer period. If any of the participants in this webinar have questions, please put them in the Q&A, not the chat. The Q&A will come to the panelists and to myself. We're happy to answer any questions. In addition, if you have questions after we have ended this meeting, please feel free to email us and we'll do our best to get back to you in a timely fashion. So far, I do not see any questions, but I want to thank everybody who has participated today. I think it's a difficult forum at times with audio, but in general, I think being able to meet more regularly than once every 2 years can be a real advantage. I'm looking forward to getting our feedback on the Constitution and moving forward. And I'm particularly looking forward to seeing everybody in Barcelona in September. I have a thank you from Australia, from Heather. So thank you, Heather. I love that we are so international. So if there are other questions, please type them in. Otherwise, I will let you go. Thank everybody for helping me with this, and I look forward to seeing everybody soon. So thank you very much. We can end the webinar.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.